Now I'm changing composition and I'm changing ground. This time I'm working on a mid-tone. As such, I'm starting to think less about outline and more about massing in areas of light and dark. So it's useful when working in this way to start by thinking, why am I seeing these objects? Am I seeing these objects because they're light against a dark background or dark against a light background? So initially I'm starting to think a little bit like the Notan study. Dark light, dark light. Because this time we have painted the paper with acrylic first, we can move the paint around a bit more. We've got a bit more ability to add and subtract. This is where we start to think almost as if we're working with charcoal. Sometimes in charcoal drawing we cover the whole paper first. So I can put a colour down, and if I'm unhappy with it I can wipe it off and I can then start to work in. So at the moment I'm really thinking about negative space. I'm also thinking, you know, as a sort of Notan study. Where do I see light? Where do I see dark? Again, the beauty of this is that if I feel that I've put that bottle in the wrong place, then I'm just moving a blob of tone, so it's much easier for me to shift that bottle over. So unlike before where we started with a precise drawing, we can work much more organically. Sometimes it's useful in working in this way to have cotton wool buds, and you can start to erase and add, but I want to keep this quite loose for the moment. Again, as I start to draw, I'm thinking I'm drawing these objects too big, so I'm just going to take it completely back again, and a little bit of solvent on the end of the rag will bring it back to that grey ground. At this point I might just start to just kind of think about that negative space first of all. How big is that negative space? So therefore how does that give me the scale of what it is I'm doing? What's the scale of that lemon? And I put the lemon in, start to get the lemon the wrong size, so I'm just adjusting it. That helps me find out where that bottle is, where the glass is. But again, it's a much more fluid activity. I feel less precious about getting it right first time. I can breathe a bit more rather than holding my breath trying to get the drawing hyper accurate. Obviously, again, one is always checking height against width, making sure that the proportions are accurate. once I've established or happy that I've got the tones better, and again I can negatively paint into the surface. It's always quite tricky when one is being filmed because I'm having to work at a somewhat unusual angle than the way that I would normally work. Now I'm in a situation where, because I've already got a grey, I'm then really starting to think about what tones are the same as that grey, what tones are darker than that grey, what tones are lighter. If you struggle to find the relationships of tone, there are some tips. One is, obviously, you can take a photograph of your still life in black and white. Sometimes the black and white image solves the problem for you. Sometimes it's useful, if you have an iPhone, to use the noir setting, which gives you much greater contrast in your black and white photographs. So it makes it much easier to see the tones. Sometimes you can put your photographs into digital software. PowerPoint works, Photoshop works, obviously Procreate also works. Where you, having taken your photograph, you then change the tonal contrast significantly to reduce the image down to black and white. But when you have black and white using the threshold setting, you create just a pure black-white image. There's no greys involved. And again, it can really help you to see where are your darkest values. Another trick is, without switching your mobile phone at all, you look at the image in reflection through the black screen of your mobile phone. And this has the effect also of significantly altering the tonal values, making it easier to only see the big values. You can also do the same, obviously, with your iPad. So that black screen is rather like the phenomena of the Claude glass that was used as a way of looking at landscape, because landscape was regarded as being a bit too vulgar. Now that I feel happier that I've got my drawing, I may now start to mix up some lights. And now again, I'm going to start to work into my image with some light. I'm starting to think about where I see those really bright values to start with. And I might be starting to think here about some of those intermediary tones. So a bit like your grayscale, you might start almost with a white, black, grey. And then, having established your white, black, grey, your next question might be, okay, where is the lighter grey? Where is the darker grey? It's a really important aspect of this composition is the white paper that these objects are sitting on. So I'm just going to block in some of those values, but also recognize that we've got some shadows cast. So I'm going to here leave the ground to come through as the shadow. Now, although I'm mixing up white here, I haven't thoroughly cleaned my brushes, so there is a bit of residue black within those greys, which are giving me not an absolute black. And that can be really useful because, again, I can then start to think, well, there might be some real bright high notes. Now that I've established some of the big broad shapes, you can draw into the paint sometimes. This is called sgraffito, where you're scratching away areas, revealing the ground underneath. Or again, as I said already, you could come in with a cotton wool bud. I've now got some tones of the shadow. This is quite a delicate tone. Like I said before, I'm also recognizing where I see that tone in other places. Although I've got a bleed on there where the paint has run, so you get little kind of quite characteristic runs of oil paint. I'm just going to now start to clarify my edges. In tonal painting, we talk about the idea of lost and found edges. So this is the same sort of thing, same sort of application. We are looking and seeing when we see an edge and when we don't see an edge. With glass, one of the key things to really consider is that you don't actually draw the glass. Well, try not to draw the glass. What you're actually just drawing is the light that's being distorted by the glass. So it's really focusing on how that light is bending the space. Remember what we said before about working with titanium white. If I just make a crisp brush mark, it will retain its brightness. If I'm working with zinc, it's not going to have the same power as the titanium. But because zinc is transparent, one of the differences is that when we put the zinc down, the zinc blends in with the tones underneath it, meaning it enables us to get some of those tonal transitions, particularly around the lemon, to try to get some of that roundness of the lemon. Whereas if we go in with the titanium, then it's going to retain its opacity, but also retain its mark. This is where I'm coming in with the titanium, just picking up some of the light that's being reflected off of that bottle. And then I want to go back in again. There's some darker values. As I start to draw this, I'm not quite happy with the edge of that vase, so I'm just going to go back in again, wipe back, and re-establish the drawing. And I'm just picking up now. Now, another useful thing to consider as well is when you are working with oil painting and your surface, the whole surface of your painting is wet, sometimes you want to lean your hand on the artwork. And obviously that could muck up the artwork. So you can make yourself something called a mold stick. This is just an old J cloth that I've tied to a piece of bamboo. I can rest my mold stick above the painting and then I can rest my hand on the mold stick. That gives me a degree of stability. I'm not going over, I'm not touching the wet painting. But it just gives me a little bit more control in order to establish those lights that's sitting on top of the glass. So this is really the kind of tweaking process of the painting. Again, there's a few transitions of tone behind, and quite established that negative space behind. Working back into areas and then I think I'll probably go back in now. At the moment, when we are painting with oil, we're painting wet in wet, so all the painting is drying at the same time. If we paint in layers, well, we might be working with an underpainting first of all, and this is known as a grisaille or a grey underpainting. If we paint in that way and we then come back to work back over the top of this painting, we then have to consider one of the other oil painting rules, which is known as lean to fat. What that really means is that we might start off with quite terpsy colour, but as we progress the painting, we decrease the amount of terps and we start to increase the amount of oil content. So we'll be adding things like linseed oil to our colour. Otherwise, the painting can crack because we have faster drying oil layers above slower drying ones. So really we need to start with the fastest drying colours first, and then we can finish off.